Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who may look like a man, but who is secretly a 12-foot fire-breathing reptiloid.
Tim Longo?
Yes, well, that would have made more sense had you actually gotten to a particular boss, but since you did not.
The boss we were supposed to get to, or a different boss?
The boss we were supposed to get to.
Okay. Well, what is his name again? Or its name?
Olrox.
Olrox. I feel like I went to his chambers.
Yes, but you have to come back, and you have to have an ability that you haven't yet found. So, yeah, there's...
yeah, okay. Yeah, I see there's a passageway up, which I assume is what the bat is for.
I think that, yes, you need to be able to go up that. That's correct. Yep.
Okay.
I thought that was going to end up being a jump. I'm conditioned from Metroid to expect a jump for that ability to go vertically that high.
Yeah.
And it never occurred to me that I just would be flapping my way up those cameras. We're, of course, talking about Castlevania Symphony of the Night. We were to play until Olrox's time. And it's surprising because there's a lot of ways that you could skin this particular cat. Like, I don't know that we would necessarily have had to fight all the same bosses. Mm-hmm. Which is a little bit unexpected to me because it feels like last time I had not yet found the hippogriff, the red hippogriff bird thing.
I did that one.
You did that this time or last time?
This time. Okay.
Apparently I could have gone to that much earlier than I did. And I'm not sure I don't remember exactly what that gets me. I don't remember it gets me this ability or
it's just health up.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It's just a health up. So a lot of them are like that, where it's just, you fight them, you increase your life, which increases your survivability, and makes it easier to complete the game. I guess I was not expecting that, especially in the lineage of Metroid, where you have to go and fight them basically in a particular order, right? You can't miss any.
Yeah, I think that's largely true. My memory is that there could be a couple that you could do in a different order, but yeah, largely Metroid is much more of a rock paper scissors kind of design in a lot of ways, and it's a lot more closely kind of maintained world and mechanical tightness. It's very Super Metroid specifically is very tight as far as how it's all puzzled together. This is a lot looser in my opinion, a pretty cool way. Like you said, because you can do things out of order. I mean, I guess there's some ordering to it, but the reason that I'm really digging this game so far is the sense of exploration is higher because you're not necessarily always hitting walls based on mechanics you don't have. It's sometimes just you're choosing to go in a direction or not. And then you kind of fall down that rabbit hole, and before you know it, you've uncovered a whole nother area.
Right. Now, did you find Skilla?
I did finally, yes. Yep. Yeah,
okay,
down below.
Because I had found that one last time.
Right.
So that was another kind of out of order or different order between us, I think.
Uh-huh.
And there's been just that I have felt, I don't know, it's funny because there's still this sense that that progression feels natural to you, that it feels logical that you went to this one and that one, and it's surprising to me to talk to you and hear that you do things in different order, right? Because my playthrough feels natural to me.
Yeah.
But I think it's partly because of those choices being your natural inclinations to make that choice, whatever that is. I tend to go right first rather than left or what have you. Mm-hmm. And so you end up, as you put it, down those rabbit holes that just felt like the natural rabbit holes to you. Of course, that's the way you'd go, whereas somebody else might choose differently. And that's really very interesting to me about this game.
Yeah, one of the notes I wrote down for the genre in general, but this game compared to Metroid even more so. Metroid does it for sure as well, but because this one isn't so explicit with its uh, order of operation for exploring,
Mm-hmm.
the multiplicity of gaining a new mechanic or new key, essentially, like just for instance, take the blue door stuff, the blue
Mm-hmm.
door key, whatever it is, the orb of open or
Relic.
whatever.
Yeah.
Um, Obviously, in these games, when you get that thing, you now, if you, as you mentioned, I think last episode, if you remember where they are or wrote down where they are, once you get that, you now have multiple options on what rabbit hole to go down, and
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of based on what could be various things. In my case, it was sort of like, okay, well, I went to the librarian, got that blue door key ability, and found the warp point sort of shortly after that, or before, and then went back to it. And then whatever warp point I warped to, I just happened to warp to in the order of operation there. I decided to re-explore the area looking for blue doors, and that's the rabbit hole I fell down. But it's sort of like almost like circumstantial, like how or situational rather, that how which hole I fell down. But I knew once I got that blue door key that I could go and kind of re-scour the world, and then whichever one I found first ended up being 2 hours later, kind of thing.
Right. 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 Yeah, I've
But
definitely found that I still wish I had made more detailed notes. Although I'm just doing the sort of Metroidvania thing where you look at the map, you as best you can recollect why you couldn't go in particular directions, and then you just comb back over them all. You mentioned the warp points, and that's been helpful because they're reasonably well located, I suppose, to be able to get back near something that you maybe haven't fully explored. And sometimes those turn out to be useful. Like, oh, actually, there is a big thing here that I missed. And sometimes they're just kind of a minor, oh, here's this little room. I have found a place where there is a door that I can't figure out how to open. And chat doesn't tell me. So I don't actually know yet. I still haven't figured out it, but it seems to be mechanical. It's in the clockwork area with all the Medusas. Have you been there?
clockwork.
Gears like in the last one? So you haven't been there.
Well, I guess not. I mean, I'm not. You're not the outer wall tower.
No.
No,
This is only like 3 rooms with tons of Medusas flying through. There are harpies. Probably haven't seen those either then, because I think that's the only place they appear.
Yeah, no, I don't think I've seen that then. No.
Okay, yeah. So there's that clockwork tower, which is basically a throwback to those few
4.
screens from 4.
Yeah.
Very similar art, very similar mechanisms, and the fact that you can land on them and use them to navigate the environment. And then of course you've got Medusa flying through the whole time, and it's something.
Need a neutron bomb. Although that wouldn't even help that much because they respawn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
they're just constantly flying through. What was your experience of the warp points? You'd mentioned them as a specific topic to bring up.
Well, I think maybe you mentioned it last. What's that?
How many have you found?
4.
Okay, yeah, me too.
I think, yeah. Yeah, I think 4. Yeah, there's, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think you kind of covered the general topic. You mentioned, I guess I didn't know that there were going to be warp points, to be honest. And some of what we didn't know, or how the mystery of the game is going to be covered in the mail that we have later, that from a colleague and friend. So I'll cover that later. But yeah, it's just the warp points for me, almost like more of a psychological thing. give me a safety net for being sort of stuck in an area, or kind of like not bored of an area, but like maybe fatigued by an area. And so like, well, I'm kind of, I can see there's a couple things I could try, but I'm kind of beaten down on this area. So I'm just going to take a war point to another area and dabble and see what else I can find. You know what I mean? So it allows you to more safely and easily kind of jump to an area, a separate area, without having to fight your way through to, to the opposite edge, because they're generally in corners, so to speak, of the castle. And so I think that the war points are kind of an obvious thing. Many games have them. We don't not necessarily have to deep dive on them because they're a pretty obvious thing. They do in a game that is sort of so soft and squishy in its sort of critical path. It allows you to kind of bounce around and explore and figure out what you want to do next if you've, again, like I said, become fatigued. And so I just wanted to make that point, because I think in Met versus, say, Metroid, when you get a new ability, oftentimes you know what you need to do to kind of go back. Say you either have mapped it, or which door, ice door you need to open or whatever in Metroid. The list of things you're going to do next are pretty aware of, but here you can dabble in an area, make some progress, bounce around to another area, make some progress, and it's not because of the grayness there and the squishiness of it. I think the war points are actually critical for that to work. If you could imagine like having a inkling of, oh yeah, I think there's a blue door somewhere over to the southwest. Without a war point, getting over there would just be demoralizing. So yeah, they're pretty, an obvious importance, but I just wanted to bring them up.
Yeah, when you're talking about that, it makes me think of, oddly, Day of the Tentacle.
Wow.
Because you remember when we talked about that game, I said, I'd get to this point where I'm stuck with one of the characters, don't know what to do, or just have tried a bunch of things, and now I just have the opportunity to just jump to this other character.
Yeah.
And this is serving a similar pressure relief valve because there are a number of places in this game where you might not have the tools yet, right? Of course, that's part of an exploration game, and I think that they are not, as you've already pointed out, they're not as well signposted here, that you obviously need ability X, Y, or Z, because you've got that page of relics that you're going to fill out, which is whatever it is, 30 relics, say. You don't know, like, am I going to get a thing that does something to where I am?
Right.
I actually had this spiky hallway that I found, and
I found that too.
I went all the way down that hallway and got to the other end and still couldn't continue because I was still missing something else. And I don't know what it is, but I'm missing something clearly because I can't progress. There's a blue door down there, but I couldn't figure out how to open that blue door because there's spikes. So it was,
How did you? Maybe don't tell me. I was going to ask you.
No, I'm not going to tell you. You'll figure it out.
Yeah.
It will be obvious to you what to do to get to that point. But I mean, it was just, and I had just saved a couple minutes before, so I just was like, okay, just jumping on the spikes now, just to reload. It was just because you don't always know. It's really helpful to have that relief valve of, okay, let me just pop back, and try. I just kind of like will open up the map and look around and be like, oh yeah, I remember I couldn't get here. Why couldn't I get there? I better go check that out. I can't remember what that was. And as often as not, I'll find something new over there, whether it's related to that specific open door that I couldn't get through or not. So
yeah, your Day of the Tentacle example is a funny, unexpected comparison, because it does really allow. We talk about on podcast a lot. We talk about the sort of wall missions or wall levels, or just places where people get stuck, and especially in the older games where largely, if you got stuck for too long, people would just exit. And I think something that we've gotten better over time with as a medium is dealing with that problem. But it's nice to have those sorts of options even in early games like this, where where they were allowing you to to have that capability, because this is definitely a game where people there's even a couple rooms I played just before starting to record where just pretty rough combination of enemies, basically, right around where you get the mist and the Colosseum and all kind of that area. There's a couple rooms with like knights, and then skeletons that are shooting guns combined with skeletons with swords. It's basically where you get the shield rod. Did you get that?
Yes.
Yeah. So
yes, that's what I'm using currently.
Yeah, and so that room where you get that, is a pretty rough. Luckily, there's a save point nearby, but that's an example for me of like, well, if you're not leveled up to a certain point or have certain things, it's going to be pretty difficult to do that room. So you can just make note that that's where it is. Go bounce around, do something else, level up, grind a little bit, and then come back. And one thought that's occurring to me that neither we mentioned Dark Souls a lot on the podcast, and neither of us are Dark Souls players or experts. Though I think you played Demon Souls, right?
Right. Yes, I completed that one.
But man, some of the underpinnings of this game in particular, I feel like are heavy, heavy influences for those games structurally, from what I know and from what little I've played. I haven't played Demon Souls, and then I've done a lot of watching and talking about Dark Souls. So again, not an expert, but the sort of I don't know, the structural aspects of it, the RPG aspects of it, the concept of mini bosses and then escalating up and then having very spiky difficulty that then you overcome over time, retreading, shortcutting. It's all in here. It feels like.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I mean, it's got less of the so what the Souls games have is all the resetting is based on your death rather than entering or leaving a room, which feels more like
doesn't
a Zelda.
Have that. Yeah.
But aside from that, a lot of what you describe is very true. Of course, the difficulty level is very, very different. There are tells and things here, but you can pretty much mash your way through just about anything. All the sort of little fodder enemies are for the most part not a huge deal. Those rooms you mentioned in Olrox's apartments or whatever Coliseum are different in that way, in that those are actually quite difficult rooms because there's so many things right on top of each other. They can be super challenging, but whereas in a Souls game, it's typically one or two at a time at most, because they're so individually difficult. So there are some differences like that have to do with difficulty and sort of what they're trying to achieve that's different. But a lot of the exploration, connection, RPG mechanic, progression, and things like that, as well as equipment and consumables and things like that are all spot on for sure.
Yeah, just unexpected. I think the layer of the RPG and progression elements of the game are having a much bigger impact on things the deeper we go than I had anticipated. Even specifically jumping to one topic I know we had on our list, and it's just a natural segue, so I'll jump over there. But even some of the depth for a game like this of its time, right? It's not like a huge depth compared to games today, but still pretty deep when it comes to how to outfit yourself with the weapons and combinations of those weapons that you, based on your player choice. And so both of us, it sounds like have ended up with maybe the shield rod and the shield right now. Sounds like that's what you have. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I have the Axe Lord shield.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't have that one yet, but I think I have the Knight shield or whatever. But
that's what I had before. So one thing you may not know about this, and this is another example of how deep this game can go, and actually this is kind of a frustrating thing. If you hold your shield up while you have the shield rod equipped, you can essentially cast a spell with the shield rod. I did it only once. I think basically it's like hold the circle, which is typically your shield button, and then maybe press and hold the square, and it'll cast a spell which is unique to each type of shield. So depending on what shield you have equipped, you'll have a different effect that this sort of spell-like ability is cast from the rod. And it's just...
It's like a projectile?
Well, in my case, it spawned because I was using the Axe Lord shield, it spawned an Axe Lord, which just started running in the direction I was facing. There was nothing there, but because I was just testing this out, somebody was explaining to me how you could do this on the chat. And it's just, I look at things like that and I'm like, there might be too much of that stuff.
Yeah.
Because you don't spend a lot of time with any weapon. Pick up a weapon. It's a little bit better. It's a little bit better one-handed. So you go to that and, you're keeping the same shield. Then you get another shield, etc. I would never think, first of all, to even do this with this thing, with the shield rod. I wouldn't even think that it does something like that to begin with. It's not explained. And then to have it be dependent on what shield you have.
Yeah.
Like it becomes it's sort of like XCOM in that there's an analysis paralysis of what should I be doing before I go into a fight? Like what should I have equipped? Because there's so many different things that could be going on. I found although I didn't play this game, I heard it was quite good, the Mario and Rabbids Kingdom Battle or whatever it was called.
Yeah, XCOM.
The XCOM they simplified down the percentage-based model.
Yeah.
To 0, 50, or 100%.
Yeah.
That's it. That's 3 values.
Right.
And that's something you can think about and reason about. But if it's 90% or 96%, what's the difference in those things, right? And it feels a similar way in that there's so much that could be going on that I don't know. To a certain degree, I just have to do the dumb thing of just constantly picking what seems to be better, even though it may totally not be for the next situation I'm going to find myself in.
Yeah, yeah. No, I get what you mean. I mean, a counterpoint, just to play devil's advocate, and not to bring up...
The devil doesn't need any advocates, Tim. He's the devil.
Not to bring up Dark Souls again, or even any game, any modern game with some of these same elements, really. It's all opt-in anyway. So one of the, again, not to jump to the punchline of this, but the email that I have that I'll read later kind of covers some of this stuff too, because he's very passionate about the game. But it's opt-in for you anyway. Like the manual does cover a little bit of this. It does talk about comboing different weapons with each other and exploring with that stuff, but it doesn't explicitly tell you what to do. But once you discover that stuff, if you find one that you like, then you can stick with it. It's up to you. The depth is there, similar to in a Dark Souls type game, right? There's so many different builds you could use, and you don't have to, well, once you go down a path, you can't, you'd have to, I don't know if you can respec in Dark Souls, but I don't think you can. I think you're picking a path, right? You're going down that path.
Right. Yeah. I don't believe you can respec.
But there's a lot of different options there, right? And once you commit, then you commit, and the others are just not for you, kind of thing. To give you an example of something I was dabbling with in the weapon combos before I found the shield rod, I actually was rather than having. So I wrote down a note before I give this example to talk about shields. The shields specifically are coming off of Super Castlevania 4 to this. The shields alone are kind of a game changer for the game for me, because it gives you a defensive move. I wish it kind of had a parry or something, but the block with the shield is good. It's a game changer for this because of there's so many projectile based enemies that I definitely felt was missing from 4, and it was a nice innovation there because it gave you that extra layer and that extra option that you didn't have before, rather than just jumping over it or hitting it with your sword or something like that.
Right.
So I wanted to get that note out there. But then second, what I was running around for as a build for a while, I actually had a mace in one hand and a sword in the other, which maybe you did as well. And the reason being is that the mace actually, or Morningstar actually, to be specific.
Yeah, Morningstar. Yep.
The Morningstar was really good against certain enemies, and the sword was really good against other enemies. And so I would come out, and I just...
so you basically had slash and bash going.
Exactly. Yeah. So I would basically, based on square or circle, I would, on the fly. And sometimes when those enemies were mixed, like for instance, skeletons and then like a zombie soldier or something, I can swap on the fly between those two and actually really mix it up and feel, at least for myself, I felt cool doing that. I felt like I was really outfitted and prepared for various things. Now, of course, I had to make a choice because I couldn't carry a shield, but then I was then having to dodge. So, but it was at least something that I chose to do, which was cool.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, typically, I think of something like Diablo 3 will streamline this stuff all the way down to like, there's a million choices, but you can respec anytime. But there's sort of broad categories of what your things do. Each class may have a different sort of feel to it, but just generally within your class, it's like, oh, this is the thing that generates my secondary resource. This is a big consumer of that secondary resource that does something defensive. This is something that does offensive, that, secondary resource, et cetera, right? They sort of have streamlined that stuff all the way down. And there's still lots of opportunities to sort of customize the way you like to play, mostly driven by the loot, which is less of a thing here. Here, the loot really is the thing that lets you do that customizing. So it is a different kind of feel. I don't know. I think it's just my, my old school gamer brain going, well, what is the perfect thing to do, right?
Totally.
I'm trying to min-max that and get the most out of it, and on even a per enemy basis, right? I fought that Olrox, just 20 minutes ago, well, an hour ago, and in the middle of the fight, I had to consume a bunch of consumables. I'm like, oh, do I want to switch to this? Do I want to consume this potion? Am I going to need that later? Just like having all those kind of questions and like looking at my inventory and feeling a little overwhelmed from that standpoint.
Yeah.
So.
No, I get it. And that's why it's a devil's advocate point, because I feel the same feeling that you have often too. I just think the thing I'm impressed with is that they chose to go this deep to begin with, and if I can imagine someone playing this game when the PlayStation came out, right? And it's definitely an interesting kind of weird time, both in the industry, but also for platforms. And there's a lot of other sort of experimentation going on in the 3D realm with games we've played and games we've talked about of this era. And then playing this game when it comes to a depth of mechanic, depth of world construction, depth of progression, enemy depth, world design, level design, like there's just so much there. I can see somebody really just sinking deep. I'm actually sinking deeply into it. Like the second session was much longer than the first one for me, and I'm really enjoying the game, like way more than I thought I was going to. I think it's a really good game. And I know it's dumb probably for me to say that because everyone, a lot of people who've played the game and it's, as Brett said in pre-show, it's considered to be a classic. We both intellectually knew that to be the case. Neither of us were we just weren't Castlevania players for the most part. And so I shouldn't be surprised, and it's silly that I am, but I am. And it's compared to Metroid, as I have said many times, being such a huge fan of those games, especially the 2D ones, and of that game structure, to have this extra sort of like multiple layers of additional or different things happening within the same structure is really refreshing. And really impressive. And now I see what all the kind of the hubbub has been about, why. Even though it's funny that this game came so late after Super Metroid or even Metroid 1, why the Castlevania term has been combined, because they are chocolate and vanilla, kind of differences in a way, to the same structure overall, but there's a lot of different things going on, and it's been really eye-opening to explore and really dabble and fool around with what's going on here. There's a lot of surprises in this game too, even just little things. And
enemy types. There's been some interesting. I don't want to spoil anything, but there was an enemy that had been in Castlevania 4, and I came up against what I thought was another one of it, and it turned out to be a very strange variant on that enemy that was, it was a surprise when it did what it did, and I don't want to say what it is because I know you can't have gotten to it yet.
Okay.
It's not something you can have seen based on your current abilities. So I just had this moment of like, whoa, wait a minute. I thought it was one of these, but it's definitely not one of them. And I had to, on the fly, really correct for my approach, because I was attacking something in a particular way, and it really needed to be attacked in a different way.
Oh, intriguing.
Yeah.
Now I want to know. Well, you have to bring that back up.
We'll talk about it next time. Yeah. You mentioned you had a longer play session this time. How long have you played the game? What's your current playtime? I thought we talked about discussing sort of where we are, level, time, percentage.
Yeah. Well, actually, I looked at the in-game in Castlevania I'm at, and which isn't accurate to how much I've played because it doesn't track your deaths. That's 4 hours for me. But I did neglect to look at I don't know, does PlayStation cover that? Is there a way to look on the PS3 how long I played?
Oh, I don't think so. No. I don't think
so I don't know.
Generally speaking, platform holders don't want you to know that you've been playing that much. Right?
Well, Steam is so good at that. That's so weird.
I know.
They don't do that.
That is the exception.
Switch
I think.
does it.
And PCs. Oh, okay. So Switch does it. Well, so they do it because they don't want you to be spending too much time in the game. That's a parental control for cultural parental control, not a enforced parental control. That's a whole different can of worms.
I'm going to guess maybe 6 hours total that I've played. I've definitely been dying a lot, so and restarting a lot. So 5 or 6 probably of that.
Okay.
Of total 4. I'm at level 19, and I'm at 54.6%. Which whatever the percentage means, but
I'm probably twice as much time, real time, into the game. My play time is only about an hour more. I looked and it was 452.
Yeah.
But I'm 72.5% complete in theory, and I'm level 24. But I know today alone I played close to 4 hours.
Yeah.
A good 3.5, a solid 3.5 hours today. And then I played last weekend as well. So, and I played about 2 hours each day. So it's probably running at like half or 2/3 time for me, is the actual in-game time. I tend to push my luck a fair amount. I've gotten better about this. Sometimes when I play these older games, I forget that I'm going to come up against things that are too hard, right? And I push myself into it, and I'm like, oh no, when did I don't remember when I saved last, and I end up having to redo stuff, but not too bad. I'm getting a better sense of the game. I'm definitely feeling like I understand better where I should be able to go now. But the game is essentially entirely open to me now, because I have all the forms that Alucard can change into. So
there's one topic unrelated to what you're saying that I forgot to mention in pre-show, and I'll just cover it very briefly. One fundamental difference between Metroid and this game that I did not anticipate, and I don't know, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, I don't know how better to describe it, but Metroid was much more of, like I said before, a rock, paper, scissors sort of situation where you would get a certain type of beam, and in some cases you could always do damage to some degree to most enemies with your standard beam, but in other cases you would need a certain beam to do any damage to certain things, you know. So it was a little more binary in a lot of the sort of quote unquote progression, even though there wasn't really levels. You got a sense of being more powerful over time because you had more tools in your toolbox. Here, the fundamental difference of just having more health and leveling up, and of course you could have more health in Metroid, but there wasn't necessarily that same sense of kind of like grinding, you know, or
right.
Do I have enough stats to go after this boss? You know, I went to the Colosseum actually and found Richter and the Minotaur werewolf fight.
Yes.
I found it earlier and felt underpowered, and so I actually went and did a bunch of stuff and then came back. I think actually after I got the shield rod even, and drank a couple potions, did a couple things, and it was kind of a breeze battle at that point. But that is a strange feeling in this kind of game, you know, to have the sense of, am I the right level, or am I at a level that I feel comfortable with, or, you know, and that there's that analog nature of that versus a feeling of more binary nature in Metroid. And it's just such a fundamental difference that I just didn't see coming. And it's as we've talked about on the podcast, I think both of us appreciate RPGs in general, and having that layer in here it's just been so cool because I think I talked about last episode, I love the world structure side of these games, and to have this, you know, it's a chocolate peanut butter situation for me. I don't know why I'm making food references this whole episode, but
you might be hungry.
I must be hungry.
You must be. Yeah, I mean, I think Metroid is a much more constrained experience in the sense that they expect you to be within these parameters. You will have at least this much health, and at least this many rockets and whatever.
Yeah.
And you'll have no more than this many because we know exactly what's been gated off. But here, with purely by having a leveling mechanic, you don't know. I mean, it's like a JRPG thing in that you can go and grind.
Yeah,
you will become stronger, and the game may become easier for you. The game will become easier for you, and that's sort of a player relief valve of a different type, which is maybe the theme of this game, is that there's a lot of player relief valves.
Yeah. To continue to butcher analogies for this, I'm trying to find.
Oh, good. Now you're butchering.
Yeah, now I'm butchering.
You don't even eat meat, and now you're butchering.
No, it's terrible. No, and I'm going to move away from food, but I feel like Metroid is like it's like a Rubik's cube or something. It's very, follow me here a little bit on this dumb analogy, okay. But it's like a Rubik's cube in that, you know, it's one tightly wound, cohesive piece, right? Where you're just rotating and twisting and turning and eventually solving it in a way. And this feels, I mentioned sort of squishier earlier. This feels like a series of smaller blocks that you can put together into a cube however you want. Do you know what I mean? So it's like a little more malleable, but it sort of, the end result is sort of the same, but it's not so tightly wound, you know, in a good way.
Yeah,
it's just very contrasting, even though the end result is a cube,
or like a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah, or a jigsaw puzzle. Yeah.
Like where you can just, I found a couple of things that fit together nicely, right? And I don't know where they fit in with everything else, but I did that part.
But I did that then. Yeah.
Yeah.
The order.
And I ended up getting frustrated. I couldn't find another piece that fit. So I just went over to this other place where I had some of the wall, the side, you know, or whatever. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, good. We came together to find a butchered analogy. Good. We found it. Woo. Rubik's Cube versus the jigsaw puzzle.
We've been working together long enough that
teamwork.
Jeez. Sad for them. I don't know, why do people listen to us? Anyway. I don't know, I'm trying to pick out like topics to cover. One thing that somebody pointed out to me in the stream, this will bring us over to the Librarian, is there's the Librarian has for sale tactical information.
Yeah. I haven't purchased any yet.
it's basically just a video of somebody who played a particular boss well. So you unlock these as you beat bosses. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're really there for a new game plus or a new game. I don't know if this has a new game plus, but a second playthrough, because you've already beaten this thing. You don't have an opportunity to go, like other games of this type, right? The bosses, the sort of fodder replenished, but the bosses are one-time fights. So I went and bought the cheapest one, which was the Dracula fight, which you have fought at the beginning of the game with Richter, and watched him do that, and how he tackled different stages of that fight. And the way I played, I ended up needing help from another character who came in and basically gave you a bunch of health and power, but the video actually showed how you don't need that. That's just there. That's just there for us because we haven't played.
Right.
So that was interesting too. The Librarian is an interesting feature of this game.
Mm-hmm.
And it provides an avenue for choice, meaningful choice, because it's based on a resource, money that you've been picking up. And sure, you could grind for that money, but to buy today, I was only 500 gold pieces shy of something kind of major that was like 12,000 or whatever. And I was like, well, I could just go out. I know there's like a 25 gold piece bag just outside. And then I'm like, yeah, but I'd have to go and do that, whatever, 20 times. I'd have to enter and leave that room 20 times, go and hit that one candle that I know it's on. I was just like, that's ridiculous. Like, I'm not going to spend my life that way. I mean, sure, I could do it.
You could.
And there was a point, too. I don't know if you've gotten the healing mail yet. There's an armor set that while you run around, you just gain health back. It's not super fast. It's like a point every so often. And there was a point where I'd gotten knocked around pretty good, and I was down to maybe a third of my health or something like that. And I was in a room, and I was just kind of running. It was a long room, and I was just kind of running back and forth. All the enemies were dead. And then I did it a few times. I'm like, this is dumb. If I die, I die. I'll just redo this room. It's fine. It's not the end of the world. So it's just really interesting that there's an opportunity to grind, but grinding's just not fun enough on its own. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There's this will
There's two topics there. Really, is the grinding, which is kind of how I was getting to the Librarian, but also the Librarian, I think, is a thing to talk about.
Well, there's in the mail that I will read later. There's he brings sort of the macro grinding topic up, but not in a intentional sort of versus like a JRPG where you say to yourself, I'm going to go grind right now. He brings it up in a different way. So and it relates to the map and the opacity of the game in certain ways and the opacity of the map. So I think it's a really excellent point that he brings up, and I think we can come back to it when I read that.
Okay, cool.
But yeah, I mean, technically the way we would define grinding today, it does exist, but I don't think the game is really structured in a way to make that like a viable thing. So I agree with you there. Yeah, it's not really, it's not conducive to it. Yeah.
They've set the numbers high enough that, like, I didn't even. I mean, of course, I knew this game had like XP and stuff, but there's never been a point where I go and look like, well, how much XP do I have? How much do I need for the next level? And do I want to just do that for a while to try to get there? I just do the exploration.
Yeah.
I'm doing the principal thing of the game, which I think is really what comes across so well is that, and it's kind of what we've been talking around in a number of different ways, is that I grind because I'm exploring and I'm going back through places that I've been. I'm not there to farm the piddly numbers of points, I assume, because this is not a superpower fantasy get to 100 levels type game. No, I'm just it's just happening along the way.
Yeah.
And there's often times where I'll just run by enemies because I know how to avoid them, and I just avoid them because I'm trying to get, I have a goal in mind, and I'm trying to achieve that goal, which is set by me as well, right? It's the game has not said go to this quadrant and find the one space you haven't been to. I decided that. So
let me ask you this: how many do you ever set goals of I want to buy a thing from the librarian someday?
No.
Okay.
As soon as I see stuff in his list, I go and I say, do I have enough for this now? And I go, nope.
So you're not saving money.
I don't even remember what it was that I was trying to buy.
Okay. So I am doing that a little bit. I'm at least kind of stockpiling money. My follow-up question to my first one to you was going to be, how often do you skip candles when you're running through? Or, you know what I mean? Do you leave them, or do you always destroy them to see what's in them?
Almost always destroy them.
Yeah, see, so I do too, and I think it's another form of grinding. And even though I'm not going through intentionally grinding, you don't have to do that, right? And if your hearts are full, there's really no reason to other than money. And so
right.
In a way, you're just mixing your grinding in with normal play.
Right. Well, and that's true of the cannon fodder as well.
Well, and I think that's the crux of.
But there are times where I will skip the candles because mostly it's because I'll have a sub weapon that I'm happy with, and I'll be in an area where I'm like, I'm pretty sure one of these candles is some sub weapon that I don't want, and so I'll just, because I remember, oh yeah, I picked up something here and I didn't like it, there's a stopwatch here somewhere.
Sure, yeah. I just mean
so it's things like that. But yes, and the same with the enemies. Sometimes it's like, oh, it's just this next room. I just got to get there, and so I'll jump over enemies' heads and things like that. It's very, very sort of similar. But the feeling of just going and getting the hearts or the occasional money drop or what have you is just pleasant in and of itself. It's just, I'm just running around, and while I'm running, I'm hitting the attack button, and sometimes I just leave them behind me with money too. I just don't care. So I really am not, I don't, I know what you mean. Like I am in effect grinding as I go. But I also feel like, but it's not even a secondary concern for me. It's something that just kind of happens naturally because the fundamental mechanic and watching him do it is just fun in and of itself. So.
Yeah, and I think that's the point. Yeah, that the tuning and balancing of the game is such that they have potentially hit a sweet spot for that motivation as you play, right? And so even though you may not specifically set a goal for yourself of what you want to buy from the librarian, you do have it in the back of your head of like, I might as well just collect money as I'm going, because it's fun to do. I'm doing it. I'm going to do it anyway. It's on the way. It's easy to do. And then because of those facts, they've potentially tuned and balanced around that so that when you do eventually get back to librarian, you may have what you need to buy what you want, Yeah. So yeah, it's intriguing. As far as like potentially masterclass in balance, tuning and balance for economies, it's a very interesting game in that regard. I feel like they did a pretty good job so far, at least from my perspective. And I think neither of us are using guides to play, right?
That's correct. Yeah. The only time I ever look at a guide is to determine how far to play next time. So, and really then I'm just kind of picking a number from, how many numbers are on this? Oh, this is a 68 point list. Okay. Well, then we're playing to 33-ish this time. Yeah. Because we're halfway through. Yeah. So yeah, that's basically how I've been doing that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's been nothing that I've picked up from that. And the one I've been using is actually super. It's just a sentence. Oh, then go do this. It's like basically, then go kill so-and-so. It's like, oh, okay. I don't know who that is or where they are. I don't have any information. So.
Yeah, and I'm asking that because it relates to that mail again too. So.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, let's actually start then turning to the mail. We wanted to keep this week a little bit shorter, just as a result. Before we do that, I will say, for next week, we're gonna play until we get to access the inverted castle.
All right.
Yep. Don't know really how to describe it more than that, because that's basically the line that was at the 3/4 mark for this game in the very simple walkthrough I've been using. So yes, hopefully we'll know that when we see it.
Yeah.
It's not a boss, so it's a little bit less clear, and I think that will set us up well to finish it in the week following, which is when I'll be recording it with you.
Yeah.
In person.
Right. So we'll finish this, in person. That'll be fun.
Yep. Yeah, it will be fun. I look forward to that.
I think last episode we were talking about guides and, how tricky it is to play on the podcast without them sometimes to make our, essentially our timing. And I mentioned, we both mentioned we're sort of completionists in most games, you even more than myself, but I tend to play fewer games, but go very deep into those games. And I try to prevent myself from doing that on the podcast because of the time constraints that we're under. However, I'm starting to find myself doing it in this game because I like it so much.
Yeah.
Like, I am definitely going back and doing small sections or going out of my way. And I'm wondering if that's why I haven't fought as many bosses maybe too. Cause like, even if it's just I have a memory of like an urn that I didn't destroy because I didn't have a double jump or something, I will spend more minutes going back to do that than I probably should. And I think it's a testament to the game because I'm falling into that trap very quickly now.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, it is. It's good and bad. Good for me as a gamer, bad for the podcast. So
it's fine. You'll hopefully, I don't know when you're going to get the time to actually, I guess you'll have that day off that we're going to record next week. So you'll fit it in.
I'm going to have to cram it in there when I get back. Yeah, it'll be tricky.
Yep. You have to, because time is short at that point for me, because literally the next day I'll be driving out to area.
We'll stay on track. It just depends on how far I get, but we'll definitely, I'll play something. But,
okay.
Yeah.
And there'll be plenty of topics. Okay, well, let's swing over to email. We actually also had some reviews. We had a singing review, so that's going to happen. So we had somebody go back and edit their old review to make it a singing review. And I have not practiced for it yet, so maybe I'll do that in. Boy, won't that be special when I'm doing that in person with you?
Right, do it in person. Perfect.
Yep, perfect.
I could film it.
Oh no,
we can do something with it.
No, that could not happen. Okay. Anyway, thanks for sending these over to devgameclub@gmail.com. Why don't you go ahead and give me the first one?
Okay, let's see. Castlevania and emulation, and also stairs from the Second Quest. On the last,
that's his real name.
It's definitely, that's a cool real name. What his parents were, her parents were very clever. On the last episode, you were briefly discussing emulation and issues that can come from that process. It reminded me of how Castlevania 3 on the NES, the basis for the awesome Netflix animated series, which now I want to watch, was at least at the time for a time somewhat known for being difficult to emulate, particularly when trying to play an original cartridge on modern third-party NES hardware clones. This mostly stemmed from an additional chip called a mapper used in the cart to expand its capabilities, something a lot of those manufacturers couldn't emulate due to the patents and such. While far from being a unique example, and I'm sure software emulators may have overcome the issue by now, It's an interesting coincidence that you would bring up the topic during a Castlevania series, given the entry in its history. Also, you guys seem somewhat amused by the staircases in the game series, and how you could jump through them. While I don't recall every example in the game off the top of my head, I seem to recall that they were probably just simulating old staircases you'd see in horror castles and period film staircases, often made of stone, built from a wall with the opposite side open into the room below. The kind that Robin Hood might leap off of during a duel, or that Dracula would descend down from. Not an enclosed stairwell. So many stairs, Hulk out. So if that is the case, then the jumping mechanic would be akin to leaping off of the side of the staircase or up onto it. Again, maybe that doesn't hold true for every staircase in the game, but I suspect that is what they were basing it on. Cool. Thank you. The second quest. Yeah. The mapper. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's a memory mapper. It's a specific one that was used in a number of NES games. Looks like 8 or 9. But the best one, the best known one, is definitely Castlevania 3. Yeah, it's sort of similar to what it does. Similarly, what I described was done with the Pokemon cartridges, where you are basically mapping a bit of memory to the actual hardware space. Although I think in Pokemon's case, that's just a copy of that memory into that space. Here, you're actually literally saying, "Oh, you're here. Then go ahead. When you ask for this address, I know that means this actual address on the cartridge. Some offset of like, oh, that's at the 2K boundary, the 4K boundary, and that's what that means. That's what a mapper is. We use memory mappers today, except they're mostly in the OS or something like that. Yeah, I mean, we talked about the difficulties of emulation. I wasn't aware of Castlevania 3 having that particular history, of course. But yeah, it's when you're giving somebody a physical cartridge, you open up these problems, right? Because you put whatever transistors you want in there, as long as they respond to the API that's provided by the manufacturer. What you do on the other end, kind of up to you, and as long as it's fast enough, etc. So yeah, it's pretty interesting, and there's not a ton of them. As far as the staircases go, yeah, totally didn't think of that. Totally makes sense. Makes sense.
It's a clever theory on that, and it'd be interesting to know if that's where they're coming from on it.
Yeah, no, I bet they are. I mean, I think that makes a ton of sense. It's funny because the game feels like, this is a cutaway. Mm-hmm. It's like that, like those illustrated books, like literally one of them was called Castle or Castles or something like that, where it just like slices away the side of the building and you can just like see into it. And that was, of course, what I essentially thought was happening, right? Is that I'm able to see into this thing because we've cut away the side. But it didn't even occur to me that, of course, yeah, Robin Hood's a great example, of the daring do coming down those staircases and being able to jump down to the next floor because it's open. So yeah, that's a good observation. I think that's that's definitely something you would see in like an old, I don't know, Roger Corman film or something like that. So makes a lot of sense to me.
There's an interesting correlation a little bit with the Symphony of the Night too, because the stair mechanic in general that we talked about for Castlevania 4, they expand upon that quite a bit in this game because they have 2 layers of depth for platforms throughout Symphony of the Night, where there are some that you can jump up through and land on, and there's some that are just ceilings, or you can't.
Right.
And so there's a sense of visual language and artistic choices there that have to be clear to the player on when they can do that and with which platforms. So it adds, even though it's 2D game, largely it adds that 3-dimensional a little bit of that three-dimensional depth where you're making different choices. So you can fall through, you can jump down and up through, but in some cases you can't. So it's another nuance to the level design that might be missed by some people. So it's cool.
Cool. All right, let me read one here from Scott, just titled Super Castlevania 4, before we get too far away from Castlevania 4. It says, Brett and Tim, I've enjoyed your discussion of Castlevania 4. I'm the opposite of you two regarding gaming background. I primarily play and have played console games. Castlevania 4 in particular is a game I played extensively growing up, and I've enjoyed hearing your experiences coming to it for the first time several decades later. Something that may surprise you is that Castlevania 4 is generally considered an easy game compared to Castlevania 1 and 3. Castlevania 2 is not difficult to finish, assuming you know where to go. Its challenge lay more in figuring out what to do rather than overcoming arcade-type challenges. As evidence to that, I love the Castlevania series, but I've never completed the first game.
Wow.
The main reason Castlevania 4 is easier than 1 and 3 on the NES is that you have much more control over how your character moves. In the NES games, once you started a jump, that's it. You were committed to the entire movement. Whipping also was only possible straightforward. I think he means directly in front of you. Much of the challenge of the NES games came from having a limited movement set that you could not correct once committed to. In Castlevania 4, because you can move in the air after jumping, whip in multiple directions, and use your whip as a dynamic shield, it's a lot easier to course correct if you realize you made a bad jump or a bad whip. What's curious about Castlevania 4 is it has the most control over both how the character moves and attacks players ever get in a Castlevania game. Game immediately following Castlevania 4 is Castlevania Rondo of Blood, which came out on the PC Engine in Japan and never came out in the States until this decade. It went back to the NES style where you had no control after committing to a jump and you could only whip straight forward. Castlevania Bloodlines for the Genesis allows some multi-directional attacks with the non-Belmont character, but jumps are more like the NES games. And then he talks about Symphony of the Night, which is a follow-up to Rondo of Blood, and it goes back to allowing you to control your character in the middle of a jump, but you can still only attack straight forward. Subsequent GBA and DS games take after Symphony of the Night. In this manner, Castlevania 4 is very experimental, as they never give this much control to the character again. He mentions Dracula X, which is just the SNES port of Rondo of Blood. And then he says, regarding personal challenge, I played the game last year on the SNES Classic. Muscle memory and general platforming skills enabled me to breeze through the first half of the game, but the second half started to present a real challenge. And I forgot that the end of the game is a boss rush. I abused save states for the boss rush, and in particular for Dracula. Probably took me close to 30 attempts to beat Dracula. I'm amazed I did that back in the day and didn't think it was hard. Thanks for reading. I love the podcast. As I said in the beginning, we have different game playing histories, which is part of what makes it so interesting for me to listen. I also normally let a bunch of episodes queue up, so it's nice to be able to give real-time feedback. Scott. So, wow. Yeah, this made me remember our discussion about Tomb Raider and being committed to an animation and being grounded, right? That's something that we talked a lot about in that series. And the trade-off that we make when we're developing games of sort of groundedness or realism versus player control and the player being able to sort of make their decisions more moment to moment than sort of into sort of discrete chunks that are animation limited. So for more deeper discussion of that, go back and track that series down. It was probably in the second or third episode that we talked about that, but probably touched on it multiple times. Yeah. Yeah, but this was an easy game, Tim.
we were convinced that it was like one of the hardest ones. Oh man, that was a great mail though, because it gave some history that we would never have been able to research on, or unless we had done a lot deeper research or played those games. So really appreciate the mail because it gives us a lot better context. The nuance of the amount of control that they gave to 4 and how it's a little bit of a an outside case is fascinating to me. And as an experiment, I think he described it. So that's really cool.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it seems like, it's funny because I hadn't really thought about how in Symphony of the Night we actually have more limitations in some ways. Not in others, obviously, because of course you're in an exploration game and you have to be able to do different sorts of things to get to different places and things like that. So that's just, but that's more of a capability that's added rather than sort of a moment-to-moment control thing. It's like, oh, now you can, turn into mist for a brief period of time or something like that. It's very kind of contained in its usefulness and not just the sort of constant feel of the game. So yeah, that's
we definitely have to talk about character animations next time, though.
Okay.
There's a lot to talk about there. It's pretty impressive, and I can see its legacy there in a lot of modern games specifically.
Oh, absolutely.
Influence people. Yeah. There's a lot more going on there than I realized for this game this early. Yeah.
All right. Do you want to tackle your final email, which is from a former colleague of ours?
Yeah. So this email came in from Alex Noisy, who is co-founder of Choice Provisions, which is a game developer that many of you may know, the most known for their Bit Trip series, Bit Trip Runner and the like, among other games that they've developed and published themselves in many cases. They
were known as Gaijin Games.
Gaijin originally, yeah, and then they changed their name to Choice Provisions, but originally Gaijin Games. Yeah, you might know them that way too. But Alex is a good friend and very passionate about Symphony of the Night. So when he does listen to the podcast occasionally, when there's games that pique his interest, and this one came up. So I'll just read his email. It's nice to hear from some developers sometimes. So that was cool. And he's a good friend of ours. So he says, I was listening to your Symphony of the Night podcast this morning. He wasn't done yet at the time. And I had some random thoughts I figured I'd share with you. Are you guys going to play through the whole game? Because I think you and Brett definitely should. Something happens that you guys will definitely want to talk about. And if you haven't already done research and spoiled the moment for yourselves, don't, all in caps. It's one of those things that stands out as a mind-blowing game moment in my personal gamer history. I think we may know what that is now, but I'm guessing. But we'll remain ignorant of it, hopefully, and we'll talk about it maybe next episode.
I was already not ignorant of that, having played.
Okay, all right. Well, even though if it is what you mentioned about where we're going to stop next time, it's still a bit mind-boggling on that it's going to happen, and I have no idea how it would. So I'm still very intrigued. We'll talk. We'll see what he's talking about later. But I am definitely avoiding spoilers, and I'm not looking at guides, and I'm going to try to finish the game without doing that. And we definitely are going to finish now, or we're going to try. The second point, you guys talk about quality of life improvements that are missing, which I agree would be nice, such as map markers, etc. But definitely consider that this game expects you to go back to places you think you might be able to explore after getting basically every item. Because they don't tell you where to go, you have to explore more, which then leads to leveling up more because you're engaging in more combat, which then in turn leads to you being better prepared for the harder challenges that come along. They've built grinding into the game in a way that isn't just grinding. And if you had map markers, better language, around what you can and can't do, you just go from one point to another and wouldn't have the benefit of finding more items and leveling up. If you do play through the whole game, I'd do it without using a map for this reason. The game's later difficulty is designed around the expectation that you've run around a crap load. So that was what I was alluding to some of the points we were talking about as far as grinding, the integrated grinding, that I think he's making an excellent point there, that guides in the internet age could potentially short circuit some of that stuff when it comes to the tuning and balancing that they have of the economies. His next point, only a couple more. I don't know if you've ever talked about this in your previous episodes, but when playing these older games, I think one needs to consider that the manuals that came with them are part of the game experience. Back then, they expected you to read the manual. As such, I think your confusion about intelligence stat, which I did read the manual, and now I'm not confused about, and what temporary boost to it might do would be mitigated if you had bought this game in 1997 and read the whole manual before playing, for instance. So it might be worth mentioning or doing a whole episode around the importance of manuals in older games. Some games even gamify their manuals, as of course you know from MGS. But I think there's some value in reminding people that it's often not totally appropriate to take older games at 100% face value if you're playing them without also perusing their manual. So on that point, we have talked about that from time to time. And I think we often forget to read the manuals beforehand, but we usually intend to. Do you have any thoughts?
I usually look it over. I almost never read it cover to cover because they're often so long.
Yeah, I mean, I breezed. I definitely, I'll skim. But I did, on his urging, it did. I feel like whenever we start one of these, we usually don't read the manual ahead of time, but then we catch ourselves midway through thinking, maybe we should go look at a couple things. You know what I mean? I feel like we've done that a few times. And we have talked about the manual being an important part of the process and the experience back in the day. We just kind of always forget or are rushing through it. But I think it is a good point to remind ourselves of. Okay. Even though this is a 2D game, they utilize 3D at the save and heal points, which is really interesting. It's like they wanted to dabble, but knew that they weren't ready to go full 3D. A side note, I don't know if you've watched the excellent Castlevania cartoon on Netflix, but it's a fully 2D cartoon, and when Dracula uses one of his magic doodads, it's the dodecahedron from Symphony of the Night, and it's modeled in 3D in the show, so it's a rad nod, as he pointed out. I thought that was a cool anecdote.
That's funny.
Yeah, one of our other emails mentioned the cartoon, which is apparently is supposed to be very good. It's written by Warren Ellis, which is one of my favorite comic writers, by the way. Something else that might be worth looking up to talk about in part 2 or 3 or whatever is how many Easter eggs. He uses some curse words, and I'm skimming over. How many Easter eggs there are in this game. Just playing through it on your own, you'll never encounter them all, but the game is full of them, as he recalls, and some of them are very silly and fun. So that was it. So he had just a bunch of points he wanted to get off his chest, and I wanted to make sure we got them out there. They're good.
Well, hello, Alex. Hi. Haven't seen you in a while. Well,
I remember Alex always talking about this game, and as we've said, I hadn't played it before. Brett hadn't played it before, and I always had wondered, because I do trust Alex and his opinion, and I think he's a good designer and a good developer. So I'm definitely seeing now what he's talking about. This game is amazing. And on the last point, on the Easter egg point, I don't know what classifies an Easter egg, but did you find the confessional?
Yes, I actually put it into my notes to ask you. Yeah.
And there's different.
Describe what happened to you, because it's funny. I actually went back because I was streaming and I ended up near it again. I don't remember why I was going. I was trying to find something else, of course. And I went back into that room and then I did it again. And so I can tell you what happened when I did it a second time.
Yeah, I did it. I think I did all variations because I guess my first assumption was that there was something was going to happen, or that there was like a puzzle or something. So I actually went back and did, I think, all the variations, but I sat on both sides and then had both the sort of quote unquote good and evil versions of the ghosts do their things on both sides.
Oh, interesting. That's what happens. Okay. That makes sense. Cause I actually went, I didn't get the good priest, I guess.
I think you can get a good priest and a bad priest and a good
okay, because I got the confessor. I got a good confessor, and she just was sitting there and talking. And then I went around the other side saying, "Oh, well, what happens if I'm the confessor?" And then he came and he showed up and he threw spikes or whatever through.
Yeah.
It was hilarious, and it was like 1 point of damage or whatever. It's a nice little joke. And then when I went back, I actually got the evil. I got the evil of both, and they both did damage to me.
Yeah,
I was like, "Oh, that didn't happen last time. That's weird." And I didn't make the connection I basically thought, oh, once you've done it once, then only bad things happen to you.
Yeah,
because that's what it was for me. I had
right.
the good confessor first,
Right.
and then nothing good happened to me after that. So I'm glad to hear that you got the opposite, or at least you got a good version of each.
It seems
That's
random.
hilarious.
Yeah, I don't know. Once you reset the screen, I think you can do it as many times as you want. But just a funny little. There's a lot of those little things in there, that they didn't really need to put in. They just were having fun, I guess. The Gravekeeper.
I mean, do you wear the invisibility cloak?
What's that?
Do you wear the cloak that makes him partially invisible?
Who? The Alucard?
Alucard.
Oh, no, I don't have that
Cloak
yet.
you can equip that I found a long time ago. I found it last week, where he is. I mean, it's supposedly a cloak of partial invisibility or something like that. And when you stand on an elevator, if you push, I guess, up or down, he actually goes into the classic sort of Dracula pose where he pulls the cape across his face.
Mm-hmm.
And it's invisible. You see through him on all the places that the cape comes over his body. Wow. So it's just a little weird detail that they've done.
There's a lot of good details in this game.
You were going to say something about the grave digger or the grave, whatever, the gravekeeper.
Gravekeeper, yeah, that's why I made my name for the recording. The Gravekeeper. I don't know. I just love that moment too. I don't know if we meet another one, but it's this great little room where there's this fountain, and he's this monk kind of gravekeeper. I don't know why he's a gravekeeper. There's no graves there. He's more of a monk. Sitting there, and he's protecting some green tea, which I haven't used it yet, but I assume it's just a health up. But he kind of fights you in a monk style, and it's just this little room. I don't know if anything different happened for you, but
nope.
It's just at the end of this hallway, past these enemies, and but it's like some time went into that, and if in fact that is the only time you fight the Gravekeeper, that's awesome. It's just. Yeah. A little nod to some cool little thing they wanted to do. So there's definitely.
Yeah, I wonder if there's some character in Japanese cinema or something like that's meant to represent.
Might be
like that, like a drunken master type.
Yeah,
character,
exactly.
Right? Where you just unexpectedly it turns out that this character is this amazing martial artist or whatever, because it's very amusing when he started jumping around and using martial arts on me. I was like, whoa, what's going on? So for cool. Sure. Yeah, it was a good moment for sure.
He might be in other Castlevania games too or something that we don't know about. But
yeah, entirely possible. There's also a sequence where and I think this was in Olrox's general area, maybe, where there's places where you'll be going through what are basically jail areas or dungeon areas. And in the background, there are cells, and you're fighting things in the foreground. But as you pass by these cells, sometimes like a character will move up to the cell, the bars,
mm-hmm.
and kind of look through the bars and
That's
just
cool.
Be standing there being creepy, and then turn around and fade back into the darkness. And it's pointless. Like there's no gameplay there. But it's amazing. Yeah. I mean, it just really reinforces the sense of this place, and it underlines the sort of gothic and melodrama about it. So, I admire that stuff a lot.
Yeah, for sure. The attention to detail. I have a bunch of notes just on attention to detail stuff. And again, as a quick point to compare it back to Metroid, the sense of places you mentioned is very strong in this game, especially with sort of the way that they render a lot of the backgrounds, like you said. The cathedral specifically is a good example, I think. But also getting to the tops of a lot of the areas, like the towers, the bell towers and things, where you actually get to see outside, because you've hit sort of like the border of the castle. In Metroid, I'm trying to think of some of the other Metroids. But in Super Metroid, you're just on a planet, basically, right? And you're going into the planet and you're finding these cool different areas. There's the lava area and the poison area or whatever. but the sense of like a cohesive place, like a castle, is not really there.
Right.
And that's, I really appreciate that about this. You get a sense that you're in this castle, right? You're in Castlevania, and it's got its own sort of character to it. And there are actually some of the cutscenes you're seeing, people are alluding to it as a living thing or whatever. Maria, whatever her name is, she's talked about that a little bit. So there's some themes playing on that, but it's, and then when you find the caverns down below, they're below the castle where they logically would be. So yeah, it's just really, really well done as far as that whole sort of cohesiveness, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, in Super Metroid's defense, I mean, I think that the touch point that players are supposed to identify with is the beginning section, which is ripped from Alien, basically.
Yeah, for sure.
So you're supposed to feel that sense of, oh, this is something I know and understand, and oh, isn't that terrifying? And now I'm being sent into the unknown, and there, which is one way to do basically the same sort of feeling. As, okay, well, instead of doing that with Castlevania, we're going to a place that we sort of know and understand, but it's creepy to us, right? That it's inherently creepy. So it's basically two different ways to approach this kind of problem. Oh, let's go to someplace unknown. That's just naturally threatening because we don't know it. Versus, no, this is actually something we know. We know it to be threatening, right? So it's, that's the trade-off that you can make there. So
right, yeah.
Anyway. All right. Well, I already said where we're going to play to next time, and I hope you, sir, have a great trip this week, and enjoy. Hopefully, find some time to play some games. Although probably not this one. I don't think you're going to drag your PS3 along. Maybe your Switch.
Yeah, I thought about trying to bring it, but it's not going to be possible. I might get Bloodstained on the Switch, though.
Okay. I've heard that the performance is not great there, so keep that in mind.
Oh, bummer.
Yep. In any case, thanks for all of your emails and your reviews. We're going to keep catching up to that stuff. We kind of had a flood of stuff all at once and many long emails, so we'll be kind of making our way through it over the next couple of weeks. Thanks so much for joining us, and have fun playing games this week. Oh, I forgot to do all the regular outro stuff. Also, you can find us on Twitter at DevGameClub. And my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
We're, of course, on the web at devgameclub.com. I stream on the weekends whatever we're playing, and on weeknights I stream whatever I'm playing, which lately has been Dragon's Dogma. Although I'm going to be shortly going on hiatus because I'm going to be away from my normal environment for a month. Anyway, have fun playing games this week. And good night.
Good night.